And so it is now my great pleasure to introduce Harvard Business School professor Rebecca Henderson, who is also an active and extremely valuable member of the board of directors of Ceres. Rebecca is the author of the forthcoming book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, that will be published on April 28th. She's also the John and Natty MacArthur Professor at Harvard University, where she has a joint appointment at the Harvard Business School and teaches the acclaimed course, Reimagining Capitalism. She was also awarded Teacher of the Year at MIT Sloan School, where she's inspired her students on the economics of innovation and showing how large organizations can reinvent themselves. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the British Academy, among many other academic prizes, Rebecca has been on a number of boards and has consulted on numerous Fortune 500 companies. She's routinely invited to speak to executives around the world, and so it is my great pleasure to introduce Rebecca Henderson. Thank you, Rebecca.
Dawn, thank you very much for that introduction. And Mindy and the entire Ceres team, thank you very much for arranging for me to be with you today. I must say, I was hoping to be standing on a stage in New York, talking to everyone that's on this call face to face. I know we all were. Our lives and our plans have been completely upended. And I'm going to suggest that there's some hope in this, that COVID-19 is plausibly going to lead us to move faster and harder and do the right thing. But that's where I want to close. Let me open with telling you two things. The first is, I am nervous as a kitten giving this talk. This is my first talk on video, and it is very strange. So my apologies if it's not as smooth as I would normally like. The second thing I want to open with is the important thing. I want to talk about why it's so important to reimagine capitalism and how we can do it. And I think standing where we are, if you're on this call with me, you're privileged. You're probably warm, you're probably safe, you probably have a steady job. And we're in a moment where the costs of half the population being $400 away from disaster are really coming home. We're in a moment when we see that government is not functioning to keep our society safe and well, or may run into significant difficulties. We're in a super difficult moment. We need to reimagine capitalism. I'm a huge fan of capitalism. In the nearly 60 years since I was born, world GDP has quintupled. GDP per head has tripled, and that's largely the result of the free market. The incredible innovation and efficiency and drive unleashed by capitalism is, I think, absolutely critical to our survival as a race. And indeed, we will never solve the problems of climate change or inequality without the power of capitalism. But at the moment, our system is wildly out of balance. We've created a capitalism in which firms can privatize the profits and socialize the risks, in which it's quite legal to throw greenhouse gases out the window in nearly every jurisdiction on the planet, to dump plastic into the ocean, to treat employees as disposable objects, and to take most of the returns for oneself. And that is not an acceptable outcome going forward. So what can be done? The obvious solution is to rebuild our public institutions, to create a strong civil society, to build a strong, transparent democracy, and to elect a government that is willing to balance capitalism, to put in place a price for carbon, to put in place education and health spending that will allow everyone to participate in our modern societies. That's the easy back of the envelope solution, right? Just fix government, make it responsive, accountable, and widely supported, and we're done. Now, of course, that's so much easier to say than to do. And I'm going to suggest that the best placed actor to reimagine capitalism might be business itself. Why do I say that? I say it because business has a very strong case for action. It's going to be much harder to make money in a world in which the seas are rising, all the major ports are underwater, the harvests are failing, and hundreds of millions of people are on the move. It's going to be increasingly difficult to make money in a world in which our institutions are failing, in which there's a real risk of populist governments coming to power, in which authoritarianism is becoming increasingly strong. So there's a clear collective case for action, for business to come together to rebuild our institutions and to rebuild the system. The trick, of course, is that there's the temptation to free ride. And I'm on the board of 2 major Fortune 500 companies, and I know that what's important is making payroll, especially at a time like this. So it's one thing to say there's a collective case. How do we actually get it done? I'm going to suggest there are 5 steps. I'm not going to tell you that these steps are easy or cheap, but I do think they're possible, and most importantly, I think they're already underway. Indeed, I think the first 3 you'll find very familiar. The last 2, a little bit more controversial, but I think we can see the foundations of the last 2 steps in place right now as well. So what are the 3 steps to reimagining capitalism in 5 minutes? Step 1, we clearly need to double down on creating what my colleague Michael Porter calls shared value. That is building business models that create value for employees, for the society, and that address environmental problems while making money for the firms concerned. We need more firms like Walmart and Herman Miller and Danone, firms that are doing all they can to make sure that they do well and do good. That's clearly not enough to solve the problems that we face, but it's hugely important. In many cases, it can drive the transformation of entire industries. We're seeing that in the case of electric vehicles, where Tesla's made so much difference. We're seeing it in the case of plant-based foods, where firms like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods are illustrating the way in which purpose-driven firms determined to create shared value can tip entire industries. The second step is scaling these efforts up to the industry level, is supporting firms in cooperating in addressing important issues that can only be addressed at the industry level. Here are examples like the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil and the efforts in beef and soy, in human rights, in the textile supply chain are examples of what this might look like on the ground. Firms coming together to say, we must address these problems. If we don't, we may all suffer. Let's make them pre-competitive. Let's all agree not to throw greenhouse gases out the window. Let's all agree not to throw our waste into the river. None of us will suffer if we all agree, and our reputations will be preserved and the health of our long-term supply chains will also be preserved. So cooperation is the second step. Like the first one, it's clearly not enough. Cooperation is often unstable and difficult. When governments don't play ball, as we're seeing in Brazil right now, it's very hard, even for strong coalitions, to make sure that problems like deforestation don't recur. But these kinds of collaborations create enormous information about what works, and they create a constituency of firms, a group of firms that says, whoa, we're still committed to moving forward. How do we do that? And that takes us to the third step. What is the third step? This group knows that step. The third step is rewiring finance, is moving money to back those firms that are creating shared value, that are cooperating with each other, to insist that the entire economic system decarbonize, to insist that firms find ways to treat their employees in more sustainable and juster ways. This is a movement that Ceres is at the leading edge of, that is already well underway. The idea that long-term investors with very large portfolios cannot diversify away from the risk of catastrophic climate change or the death of the ocean is, I think, a profound realization that's going to yield all kinds of fruits over the next few years. So rewiring finance is tricky. However, I fear it's not enough. I think without remaking our institutions, we will not solve the problems of environmental degradation and accelerating inequality. We need to build what the development economists call inclusive institutions, the rule of law that's really free and fair, a media that speaks the truth and is rooted in the science, a democracy in which everyone participates and feels that they participate. The long-term solution to our problems is a balance of forces, balancing the incredible power and innovativeness of capitalism with a free society and a democratic process that can control its worst excesses. That's where we need to end up. And I'm going to suggest, and this is a little controversial, that business should play a role in getting us to that place. That it's not enough anymore to put your head down and say, you know, I'm doing the best I can, I'm making money, I'm dealing with environmental problems, I'm paying my employees well. I think firms also need to be stepping up and saying, you know, we need a democracy that works for everyone. We need a government that works for everyone. There are many ways to do this on the ground. There are firms now moving to try and get money out of politics. That's one of the most popular policy measures you can suggest across every party. The perception that our political process has been captured is enormously corrosive. 70% of Americans say our political system seems to be only working for insiders with money and power. We've got to get money out of politics. Firms must start insisting that money gets out of politics. This is about civics, not policies. This is about being part of a healthy, free society. Free markets only thrive when there are free politics. Business must step up and say that. Last of the 5 points, a big idea in just a couple of sentences. We need to believe, we need to act on the idea that the purpose of business is not maximizing shareholder value. Making money is a necessary means to the end, but the end is building strong and healthy societies. No one now would say, well, I'm going to employ child labor because, hey, it's amazingly profitable. That's not an okay thing to say. We need to build a society in which it's not all right to emit carbon and do nothing to mitigate it. It's not all right to argue against legislation that increases taxes that will take care of education and healthcare. It's not okay to go along when governments suppress voters in the interest of maintaining the influence of the powerful. That's not okay. So we need a cultural shift, a major cultural and ideological shift. I think you can see it happening. And I want to close by saying that I think now we can imagine it in ways that perhaps 6 months ago made these 5 steps seem pretty remote. So here's the reason I think COVID-19 offers us reason to hope. In the first place, it makes it very clear that bad things can happen. That the idea of discontinuous change is not just some line on a graph or some panicked doomsday saying, that there can be sudden shifts that might now feel real. The power of business as usual has been so strong, we've been so prosperous and so happy, that building the urgency about real change has been hard. Perhaps COVID-19 will help. Secondly, this epidemic demonstrates, like nothing else can, that we are immediately dependent on our community. I can't stay home and make money and trust that everything will be okay. We are clearly all interconnected. We clearly have responsibility for each other. So I think the cultural change may be closer. And lastly, this pandemic illustrates that the idea that the market alone is enough to give us a healthy, free society is clearly not the case. That we need a functioning government and a functioning civil society that can work in partnership with firms to build the kind of world that is so eminently possible. Nothing is guaranteed, but everything is possible. We have the resources and the technology we need to address climate change, to address inequality, and yes, to contain this epidemic and build a just and sustainable society. All we need to do is find the time and energy and passion to act. And I know that we have that. I know that it can be done. I know that we can reimagine capitalism. Thank you very much.